So what I want to talk a little bit is about being prepared and a little bit of the tone and context about doing this kind of Hill Day in the midst of this COVID crisis and in the wake of this deal that's being done now that Michelle talked about earlier. So it's March 23rd now, and sometime in the next week, they're going to finish this deal number 3, and then you will be coming to them about a week after that. So I think keeping in mind that they may be wanting to politically and social distance themselves both after this very tenuous time, but they will all be in their own working virtually and still figuring out what that means to work virtually. So be very kind and sort of gentle in how you're setting these up, and just tonally, you know, make sure you're aware that this is a very difficult time for everybody. So the other thing that I want to, so when you're requesting the meetings and you're reaching out, we understand, you know, you've been going through a lot and there's a lot, the current crisis. We hope we can still talk to you about some of our needs going forward. I will also say that if we are successful at this moment in getting that $200 million, then you want to definitely thank people, and we will send that out. If we are not, then we might also continue to ask for that, as there will be other packages going forward in the future. So one of the things we think about in these virtual meetings is you still have to treat it like an in-person meeting. You have to prepare. And oftentimes, just like a webinar like this, if you're not prepared and organized, it can go, if you don't know who's going next, if you don't know what the order is, how long, what are you trying to accomplish? Most staff members will have about a half hour for a phone call. And so you want to make sure that your team, if you're doing it with more than one people, or even just you yourself, are organized about what do I want to do for introductions and welcome? What do I want to do to, you know, who's going to speak in what order? Make sure we get all the content we want to share in 15 minutes, and then leave 15 minutes for Q&A back and forth and discussion with the staff person. So that does take preparation of your team, and don't just wing it. Find a quiet place, just like we've all tried to do. I'm in my 9-year-old son's bedroom. It's the only place I can hide right now. Test out your technology and make sure that you are, you know, all prepared across the board. And then this is just the summary. And also, I just want to say that, you know, be prepared for whatever device or system is best for that staff person. They may prefer phone calls, they may prefer video calls, they may prefer, they may prefer a certain Zoom or whatever people are using. I would let them kind of guide, and if they're not sure, then you can pick your favorite. But have that discussion with them as you're setting them up. So these are sort of general tips. I kind of talked about both at the same time, I apologize. But we want to make sure that if you also have an adult learner who is one of your, you know, one of the people serviced by your program, please make sure that you help prepare them too. There's nothing worse than getting on a phone and not really knowing, you know, if you're prepared, if your story is relevant, and if you're doing the right amount of time and things. So make sure to include them in your preparations for that meeting. But I do think, to the extent you can, and to the extent that you're even more able to do that because it's virtual, I encourage you to do it. Next slide. Another reason for having an adult learner on the phone too is it is inevitable that the staffer is going to be interested not only in our appropriations ask for FY21, not only in whatever context we're asking for our relief ask, but also just what's going on in your state and community and with learners on this particular topic at this time. So we drew up 5 kind of questions here that we think you might get from different staff members that you're talking to. You don't have to know all the answers to all of it. You don't have to have all the data, but be prepared to be able to talk about some of these things, whether through the adult learner or through the experience you're having as educators and program leaders, to talk about that, because this is still going to be top of mind for everybody for a very long time. Can you go to the next slide? So I'm turning it back to Michelle now.
Hello, this is Audrey.
Sorry. Okay.
No problem. So I can walk you guys through the national fact sheet that you'll have for these virtual Hill Day meetings, and you'll want to make sure that you're prepared to talk about these facts in addition to the COVID-19 related information that Danica just walked through. So first and foremost, we think it's important to walk through the basics. So feel free to check in with the staff and see if it would be helpful to them to give a quick rundown of what adult education looks like in your state or in your district. And make sure you take some time to explain what COABE is and what your role with COABE is. So you can mention that COABE represents the system of 65,000 adult educators and works with the 43 million US adults who possess low literacy skills. And here you can also share that COABE really works to advocate for more services, more funding, and less waiting for these adult students. And then you should describe your role in adult education and what you do on a day-to-day basis. This will help to paint the picture for the staff and allow them to ask any questions on the outset. So then we think it's really important to emphasize adult education's impact on its students and the surrounding communities. So here's a good time to include state and local specifics about your adult education program, or mention any data that you have about your program's successes or recent results. Here also, we want to remind you to walk through the national impact of adult education. So we think a really good statistic to highlight is that in 2017, 72% of all adults participating in a federally funded adult education program earned their high school diploma. So this is truly a great showcase to all of the hard work being done, and it points to successful results being achieved through our system. Secondly, we think another good talking point is that adult education programs are cost effective and they're smart investments. So share that we estimate that for every dollar invested in adult education, a community receives $60 back in increased income, property taxes, and savings on welfare and legal system expenses. This kind of return on investment statistic will be really compelling to some offices on the Hill. So we encourage you to share that. And then we think another way to kind of highlight our importance and our impact is to show where adults would be without our services. So you can share that without adult education, low-skilled adults are more likely to be unemployed, in poverty, in poor health, or incarcerated. So specifically, we have written on the fact sheet that low-skilled adults are 2 times more likely to be unemployed, 3 times more likely to be in poverty, 4 times more likely to be in poor health, and up to 8 times more likely to be incarcerated. So we really think that these statistics highlight how important our services are and how they can truly have a big impact on the students that participate. So then in your fact sheet, we've also included a section that lays out what the current adult education funding levels are. And here we really have these just so that all of the information is readily available to you should a staffer ask a related question. We want to make sure that you have all this information right at your fingertips so that you're informed and prepared. So as a reminder, in fiscal year 2020, adult education got $670.6 million in funding. And really here, I think it's most important that you thank the staffer for the $15 million increase over fiscal year 2019 and really express your appreciation for that increased funding levels. Next slide, please. So in these phone calls or video calls, the most important part is to make our funding ask. Staff really appreciate when you have a concrete ask that they can go back and really make a decision on. So our ask for fiscal year 2021 is $692 million for adult education funding. So as Michelle mentioned earlier, this is an increase of $22 million. And here you want to, explain that this increased funding will really allow us to serve the students that are in need. And kind of on that point, here's also where you want to provide the justification and the need for this increased funding. So as you all know very well, our current funding is falling far short of meeting the need of our students. So here you can point out that at least 3 million people are on waiting lists for adult education services today, and increased funding will allow us to reduce these waiting lists. Here, we also think it's important to tie the need back to the workforce, especially as we have an economic downturn coming after COVID-19. So here you can mention that 43 million adults currently lack the skills needed for many of the nation's fastest growing and often highest paying jobs. So without this increased funding, millions of Americans will be left behind, unable to get employed, while if we can get the increased funding and train more people, hopefully that will allow them to participate in the workforce and in the economy in a greater way. And you know, as Donica mentioned earlier, I think a lot of staff will want to focus on COVID-19. So here's another way you can mention that adult students are likely to be especially vulnerable in this kind of unprecedented situation. So remind staff of this and the real need for extra funding and support.